What's up? This is A-Trak, and this is How I DJ. My beginnings with scratching and DJing, first couple steps. First step is I have my dad's record player, which is an old Technics record player that wasn't a 1200, of course, so it was belt drive. So the platter was not powerful enough to scratch, so I had to scratch on a 45 that's lighter than a 12-inch. And of course I didn't have a mixer at home, but on the amp there was one switch that would cut the sound out. So I started off with my dad's belt drive turntable, and underneath a little switch that would cut the sound on and off. Once I realized that this was something that I was actually into and that, maybe I had potential doing, and even like my brother saw me one day randomly, like coming home from school, saw me scratching, him and his friends watched me, and he was like, this is unusual. Like, you shouldn't be able to do this. This is special. You should actually take this seriously. You're going to be a DJ.
This the kind of beat to go rat-ta-ta, rat-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. This the kind of beat to go rat-ta-ta, rat-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. This the kind of beat to go rat-ta-ta, rat-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, rat-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. This the kind of beat to go. This the kind of beat to go. This the kind of beat to go rat-ta-ta, rat-ta-ta-ta, rat-ta-ta. DJ Spillis, we be the realest team on the billis. Watch out, I kill it, watch out.
I come from a background of scratching on vinyl, on turntables, where what you had was what was on the turntable in terms of like tools that I can use. When I adapted my whole style of turntablism to CDJs, what was fun for me is there was all these new buttons and functionalities that I could use. It's almost like using an MPC pad or something. I can trigger vocals with pads, but I can still either scratch them, or in this case, I'm like speeding up the platter to do kind of a triplet pattern. So here. And using the cue points as a way to start the vocal, I can just keep the volume up the whole time. I don't have to worry about the mixer. I'm doing everything on here, so I'm using both hands on this wonderful machine. So I have one cue point for the start of the phrase, but then I have a ra and a ta. So I can do stuff like that. And then I realized that the vocal is so percussive and rhythmic, like this the kind of, it's so that I know that if I speed up the platter, I can turn that 16th note into a triplet pattern. So CDJs are so mechanical. It makes them super accurate. So when I do that sped up triplet thing, I can then go back to the regular speed sample just by hitting the cue point again, and it picks up on beat. Whereas on vinyl, the whole platter would still be going fast, and I wouldn't be able to just go straight away to the regular speed phrase. So I'm going. And I just briefly sort of catch the platter to pause it for a sec when I'm going from the fast speed up thing to regular speed. I just have to like catch it for a quick sec, and it goes back to regular speed. So I can find this sort of sweet spot on the speed of the break where I'm able to do this trick. So that's, the acapella, the phrase goes rat-ta. And if I hit the stop button on the top, I can make it go rat-ja-rat-ja-rat-rat-ja-rat-ja-rat, especially if I find the right speed of the break. So if the break is kind of too fast, I'm not gonna get the chirp that I like. So this is when it's too fast. It's not even stopping enough to go into chirp. And if it's too slow, it's gonna like bleed into the next syllable too much. That's too slow. So around here.
This the kind of Wa-ta-ta-ta.
That's it. My first time scratching in front of a crowd, I did the thing with my brother's band where I showed up, brought the equipment from the house, you know, in a little, you know, dive bar venue, try to find a table that you could put your decks on, like, oh, let's take this table from the bar or whatever, put my turntables, scratch with the band. That was the first time I played in front of a crowd. And then the first time that I actually just played by myself, there was a graffiti festival in Montreal that ended up occurring every year and drawing graffiti writers from all of North America. But in the early years, it was just this Montreal thing. It was called Under Pressure. And, you know, for a whole weekend, there was graffiti writers painting on legal walls and a couple local DJs, hip hop DJs, playing while they're painting. And I went up there, and I had recently met, I think, one or two of the DJs, and they're like, yo, come up and scratch. And I scratched in front of a crowd. There's a video of it. I looked like a little kid. I looked like a toddler. Okay, so this is a trick. It's kind of a category of tricks that I do in some of my sets. There's this sort of implied dialogue with the audience where I'm kind of saying, hey, recognize this loop? You know this, right? It's Basement Jaxx. Let me see where I take it, right? So then I put different drums and I run effects on it and I just kind of like run it through the 8-track matrix or whatever, the machine. So that's the idea. So, I'll find a loop that's kind of recognizable. I'll find drums that match it both rhythmically and sonically. Like, I also kind of like the subverting a little bit where rather than putting a 4 on a floor house beat, which is what we're used to hearing with a disco loop, I'll grab something that's a little bit cut up or broken beat. So in this case, I'm using an Addison Groove track. I love Addison Groove, and his productions always feel like tools that I can use and do other shit with it. Of course, filter house is a whole thing, so I'm running the loop through some filters. I'm putting echoes on it. I'm putting reverbs on it, and the displays on the CJ3000s are so clear and accurate that on the drum track, the percussive track, if there's a vocal sample that comes in every X amount of bars, I can literally see when, there's a vocal that's about to come as a little drop or transition thing, and I can mute the disco loop so that the crowd hears, the audience hears. This little thing, it kind of breaks up, the loop, and then I come back with it. But once I get comfortable with one of these tricks, now this is kind of like something that I do with a few different loops. And once I get comfortable with it, then I really freestyle. Moving to a place where I mostly use CDJs was pretty radical a couple of years ago for someone with my background of DJing. I went from using turntables with actual vinyl to being really one of the first Serato DJs. I met the Serato team really early on. I was beta testing Scratch Live before it came out, so I was their first endorsee outside of New Zealand. That also means that for so many years, I built a whole new arsenal of tools and records that are set up a certain way with my cue points and organized in my library for such a long time that, like, even when I later started using Rekordbox, just the very challenge of taking things out of this Serato library that I spent so many years setting up and updating and, customizing, that was kind of a whole thing too. All right, so as far as scratching on a club mixer, right? Because if you see a two-channel turntablist mixer, I have my own signature Rane 70 model that's available now. So there's the Rane 70, 72, there's the Pioneer S11, S9. All of those feature the crossfader pretty prominently, and it's quite straightforward to figure out kind of, what to use for scratching. On the club mixer, obviously, there's way more stuff going on and most of the mixer is there for club mixing and effects. And a lot of people don't realize that this crossfader on all the Pioneer club mixers, even the V10, actually works perfectly well for scratching. There's one thing that you need to know, and it's this button here that has the curve of the crossfader. So for scratching, basically you're moving around a record on one deck and you're cutting that sound up, in and out. And there's all kinds of different patterns that we're not even going to get into today. But that cut needs to be sharp. And there's different settings for crossfaders that make the cut-in speed or cut-in point of the fader more or less sharp or fast. So for scratching, you want to put it at its sharpest. So this one on the left has a sort of curve that's like this, that kind of shows like at the edge of your fader, you're going sharp in and out, which is the opposite of what you want for mixing with a fader. If you're using the fader to blend and mix from one deck to the other, you want a smooth fade in and fade out. But for scratching, you want the sharpest cut-in point that you can. So there's this, and then just basically understanding the A and B settings of each channel. Basically on these mixers, you can assign any of the channels to side A or B of the fader, which determines which side of the fader cuts which deck or which source of sound. But there's a way to use scratching that can enhance, the energy of certain songs. So if there's a song that kind of lends itself to it, I'll come up with, scratching tricks and moments, and even choose specific types of sounds and samples that will help kind of bring the energy up, so that then, the drop happens or whatever. And that climactic thing that the song is already trying to do, I'm trying to bring it even higher. So I'm going to show, in this case, I have just a riser. Like anybody that produces tracks has these kinds of sounds. And I'm putting an echo on it. And of course I have to, the echo has to match the BPM of the song that's playing. But the echo also just kind of helps. That's almost like when I talk about producing scratching, like that blends sonically the scratching into the energy of the track. And then I'm playing the backing track, and as it gets to the breakdown, I'm just doing what's called a transformer scratch, and just trying to bring up the intensity, the energy, so that finally I end my scratch solo right when the beat drops back in after the breakdowns. I don't think that everybody has to scratch, so I have my style of DJing, but I don't tell everybody that I meet that's getting into DJing that they have to know how to do a crab scratch or a flare. On the contrary, I tend to tell people that they have to tap into their own taste and figure out what their identity is going to be style-wise, sonically, and then figure out how to enhance that, how to build a whole thing out of that. What's really, really important when someone is like shaping themselves as a DJ is figuring out what their style is, what they stand for, and why someone's going to come to them.